I'm Robert Waters, and I'll be discussing project changes and timeliness standards. Over the life of a CoC program-funded project, it could be necessary to change aspects of the program. Any significant change to a grant requires a grant amendment before any change may be finalized. Additionally, there are contingencies that must be met before HUD will approve the grant amendment. There are different standards for significant change. For UFA CoCs with one recipient versus a CoC with more than one recipient. Requirements in the interim rule set forth the parameters for grant and project changes. For CoCs with more than one recipient, significant changes are defined as a change of recipient, a change of project site, additions or deletions in the type of eligible activities approved for a project, a shift of more than 10% from one approved eligible activity to another eligible activity, a reduction in the number of units, and a change in the subpopulation served. For significant changes, recipients should prepare a detailed written request to a local HUD CPD field office, explain the reasons for the change, justify same or better level service will be provided, and attach all relevant revised application and technical submission exhibits reflecting the proposed changes. The CoC program interim rule also specifies that recipients may make other grant and project changes that do not substantially change the scope of the project and therefore do not require a grant amendment. Minor grant and project changes include a shift of less than 10% of funds from one approved eligible activity to another approved activity. Changes that do not require a grant amendment must be documented in recipients' and subrecipients' records, and the recipient must notify HUD so that the grant files can be updated properly and locks can be updated to allow for draws under the changes as necessary. Timeliness standards. Initiating projects, each recipient must adhere to certain standards of timeliness. Recipients must promptly initiate approved CoC program activities and projects. For rehabilitation and new construction CoC program activities, recipients or subrecipients must begin construction activities within 9 months of signing the grant agreement. Construction activities must be completed within 24 months of signing the grant agreement. Activities that cannot begin until after the construction is completed must begin within 3 months of the date that construction activities are complete. Recipients should inform HUD as soon as they suspect they may have difficulty meeting timeliness standards to determine if there are other strategies that can be taken. Recipients in non-compliance are subject to all CoC program funds being deobligated, which involves returning funds to HUD. Once eligible activities begin, recipients must draw down funds at least once per quarter during the program year. The timeliness standards for distributing funds to subrecipients are: recipients must distribute funds to subrecipients in advance of expenditure of the funds by subrecipients. HUD is in the process of developing guidance to help recipients and subrecipients appropriately implement this timeliness standard. Recipients must distribute the appropriate portion of the funds to its subrecipients no later than 45 days after receiving an approvable request from the subrecipient for such distribution. It is important for recipients and CoCs to know the operating start date for all projects as it sets the beginning of the 12-month program year. This will frame the timeline for individual project operation. The operating start date indicates when the term of the grant begins. That is when the project begins to serve homeless persons. For non-construction projects, the operating start date is determined as the first day of the month in which the recipient or subrecipient begins incurring eligible operating, supportive service, leasing, or rental assistance costs. For new projects with acquisition, rehabilitation, or construction costs, the operating start date is the earlier of the first day of the month following purchase of the property or completion of construction activities, or the date that NOFA established as the deadline to begin operating the project. For renewal projects, the operating start date and the grant term begin the day after the end of the previous grant term. The recipient has to enter the operating start date for the project in locks when it begins to draw down non-construction funds for the project.